The engine clicked off. Rain tapped on the car roof as Marcus Cole turned to face his passenger, a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, glossy shoes, and an expression carved from contempt. Charles Whitmore, billionaire industrialist, didn't move. Marcus cleared his throat gently and said, "That'll be $37.50, sir." Charles didn't even blink. He stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "I don't carry cash. Bill it to the city." Marcus's voice remained calm, but firm. "I don't work for the city. I'm an independent driver." Charles scoffed. "You want me to pay out of pocket? You should be grateful I even got in your cab." A long silence. Then Charles slowly turned to face Marcus, looking him over with thinly veiled disdain. "I don't pay people like you." The words landed like a slap. Marcus's eyes didn't flinch. "People like me?" Charles looked smug, desperate, disposable. A single tear welled in Marcus's eye, but never fell. The rain grew louder. Neither man moved. Long after Charles slammed the door behind him and vanished into the marble lobby of his high-rise, Marcus remained seated. He didn't chase after him. He didn't call the dispatcher. He simply stared out into the rain, hands resting on the wheel, jaw locked. A soft voice echoed in his mind. His late wife's words, "Never let a man tell you who you are, Marcus. Show him." He inhaled slowly, then shifted the car into drive. The next ride was already pinging. Bills didn't wait for dignity. Marcus drove through wet city streets, passing glowing store windows, soaked pedestrians, and digital ads with Charles' face grinning on a billboard. Hypocrisy had a brand name now. And yet, Marcus kept moving. His pride wasn't loud, but it ran deep. Tonight was another crack in the dam. One day, something would break through. Charles stepped into his penthouse suite and loosened his tie with practiced indifference. His assistant's voice buzzed from a wall speaker. "You have a 9 a.m. with the mayor tomorrow," Charles muttered. "Hell, wait." He poured himself a drink, top-shelf scotch in a glass older than the cab driver. On the wall, framed front pages of business magazines celebrated his empire. Visionary, one raid, bah. Disruptor, another. Charles studied himself in the glass, but something flickered in his expression. A flicker of guilt? No. Disgust at Marcus for daring to confront him. "Entitlement is earned," he whispered to no one, then took a long sip. But beneath the bravado, something cracked. His reflection in the glass didn't look as sharp anymore. The next morning, Marcus stood in the kitchen of his modest apartment, pouring cereal into a bowl, while his teenage daughter, Layla, searched her backpack for her art supplies. "I'll be home late," Marcus said, not looking up. Another double shift. Layla glanced at him. "You okay?" He forced a smile. "Always." But his silence said more. Lay locked over and slipped a sketch into his hand, a drawing of Marcus behind the wheel, a small crown above his head. "You're my king," she said softly. Marcus choked up for a moment. "You know this isn't a fairy tale, right?" Layla shrugged. "No, but you still fight dragons." Marcus folded the paper gently and slipped it into his coat pocket. That day, he carried more than fare. He carried purpose. Back in the cab, Marcus drove through the morning fog, his daughter's drawing tucked safely inside the sun visor. Every traffic stop felt heavier today. Every passenger's gaze lingered longer. Word was spreading. Someone had recorded Charles' cruel comment. A clip was already circulating online, gaining traction. But Marcus hadn't seen it yet. He kept his eyes on the road, not the noise. Still, whispers followed. A woman at a red light mouthed, "Thank you," and touched her heart. A cyclist gave him a thumbs up. Slowly, Marcus began to realize this wasn't just about a fare. It was about being seen. And for the first time in a long time, people were seeing him clearly. Marcus sat in the cab during his lunch break, parked behind a rundown diner near the edge of the city. He ate slowly, half a sandwich, a bottle of water. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another share. Another comment. Someone had uploaded the video of Charles refusing to pay. The line, "I don't pay people like you," echoing across social media. Marcus hadn't posted it. He wouldn't. But the dashcam had captured it, and now the world was watching. He clicked the video. The audio stung. His jaw clenched as he heard his own voice, calm and low, asking for simple respect. He exited the video before it ended. His face, suddenly visible across every screen, had become a statement. He hadn't asked for that. He just wanted to work. But now, he was a symbol. A headline. And he wasn't sure if that was power or punishment. Elsewhere, in a sleek boardroom high above the city, Charles Whitmore's phone buzzed angrily across the mahogany table. He picked it up. Texts, voicemails, headlines. His PR manager stormed in. "Charles, the video's gone viral. Thousands are calling for boycotts. Your name's trending next to entitled racist." Charles laughed coldly. "They'll forget by morning." But his voice betrayed a sliver of doubt. The board members didn't laugh. One leaned in. "We can't afford this kind of backlash. Not with the mayor's deal on the line." Charles' fingers twitched against the glass table. "I'm not apologizing for telling the truth." The PR manager's eyes narrowed. "Then you'd better pray that truth doesn't bankrupt you." A beat of silence. For the first time, Charles wasn't in control of the room. Marcus's dispatcher called that afternoon. "You've been suspended, temporarily." The words were delivered without apology. "It's just until the press dies down." Marcus stood silently in his living room, the phone pressed to his ear, heart thudding. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. The dispatcher sighed. "I know, Marcus, but you became a story, and stories come with problems." When the call ended, Marcus sat down at the table. The clock ticked louder than usual. Layla came in from school, pausing when she saw him. "What happened?" she asked. "They took the cab," Marcus replied softly. His hands rubbed together nervously. "But we'll be okay." She sat beside him, placing her hand on his. No one said anything for a long while. Sometimes silence is the loudest scream. Charles retreated to the sanctuary of his private gym, punching a heavy bag like it owed him answers. Sweat soaked through his designer workout shirt. He wasn't angry at the press. He was angry at the crack inside himself. The splinter of shame he couldn't explain. Every punch echoed in the concrete room like a confession. He remembered the driver's eyes, not weak, not broken, just still. Still like a mirror. The voice of his father haunted him now. "A man isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he pays forward." Charles had always rolled his eyes at that line. But now it rang louder than the headlines. For a man who had built towers, he suddenly felt very, very small. At a small neighborhood cafe, Marcus sat across from a friend from church, Pastor Reuben, an older man with kind eyes and weathered hands. "You're angry," the pastor said gently. "And you have every right. But what will you do with it?" Marcus stared into his coffee. "I don't want revenge. I want respect." Reuben nodded. "Then carry yourself like the man they pretend not to see." Marcus exhaled. "It's hard, Reuben. I'm tired of always having to be the better man." Reuben leaned forward. Then stop being the better man. Be the truest one, the one Layla sees." Marcus's eyes glistened. Outside the window, people walked past without noticing him. But inside something had shifted. Quiet strength. Grounded purpose. The storm wasn't over, but Marcus was no longer hiding from it. The next morning, Marcus stood outside the courthouse, holding a file in his hand, an official complaint against Charles Whitmore for fare evasion and discrimination. He hadn't wanted to do this. But after the suspension, after the silence, there was nowhere else to turn. Reporters had gathered, their cameras aimed not at a scandalous celebrity, but at a humble cab driver who'd had enough. "Do you think filing this complaint will change anything?" one shouted. Marcus looked at them, voice steady. "Maybe not. But it will say I stood up. That I didn't just take it." The cameras flashed. And for the first time, Marcus wasn't the invisible man behind the wheel. He was standing still, firm, and completely seen. Across town, Charles' legal team scrambled. The complaint had made headlines, and now the mayor's office was re-evaluating their development contracts with Whitmore Holdings. Inside his sleek office, Charles stared at the TV, watching footage of Marcus's calm statement. "He's making you look like a monster," his lawyer said. Charles rubbed his temples. He didn't have to go public. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "You made it public when you humiliated him. This is about character now." Charles stood slowly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, his name glowed from rooftops. Inside, it began to mean less. Much less. For the first time, he realized the power of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to stand for. Later that day, Marcus visited his late wife's grave. He knelt quietly, smoothing out the flowers he'd brought, sunflowers her favorite. "I didn't want this fight," he murmured. "But I couldn't let him take my dignity, not in front of Layla, not in front of the world." His voice cracked but didn't break. "You always said truth has a cost. I'm paying it now." Wind rustled through the cemetery trees. Marcus closed his eyes and felt her there, not in voice, but in strength. When he rose, his shoulders were squared again. He had been bowed, but never broken. And now, he walked away from the grave with quiet defiance in his step. This wasn't about winning. It was about not staying silent. That evening, a local radio show aired a segment titled "Power, Prejudice, and the Price of a Ride." A guest caller, a retired former Whitmore employee, shared a story about Charles' father being rescued by a cab driver decades ago during a protest gone wrong. "I remember it clear as day," the man said. "The cabbie pulled him out of danger. They never found out his name." The host paused. "Could it have been Marcus Cole's father?" The caller replied, "Maybe. All I know is the man was black, quiet and brave." Listeners began connecting dots. Marcus listened in his apartment, the radio humming softly on the table. He didn't speak, but his hand reached for the drawing from Layla, his crown. Sometimes history doesn't repeat. It whispers. And Marcus was listening. Back in his penthouse, Charles paced. Something in that radio story gnawed at him. He pulled a dusty photo album from his study and flipped through yellowing pages. One photo made him freeze. A black and white shot of his father, younger and bruised, arm around a black man in a taxi driver's cap. On the back, a note, "To the man who saved my life. Thank you." Charles stared at it for a long time. That man. Mandibenti. It looked like Marcus. Or someone who could have been his father. He swallowed hard. The memory wasn't just real. It was rooted in his legacy. And suddenly, his arrogance felt like betrayal. Not just of Marcus, but of the man who built the name Whitmore with help he never fully acknowledged. The photo burned in Charles' hand as he dialed a number he hadn't used in years, his family's archivist. "I need everything you have on my father's foundation days," Charles said curtly. A few hours later, a digital folder arrived. Hidden in the dusty files was an old newspaper clipping. "Cab driver saves prominent businessman from mob violence." The image was grainy but unmistakable. The same man from the photo. The article named him Elijah Cole, Marcus's father. Charles' throat tightened. The man he refused to pay was the son of the man who saved his entire legacy. He sat back in his chair, stunned. The irony struck like thunder. Charles hadn't just disrespected Marcus. He had spit on the very roots that made his empire possible. Marcus stood in his hallway, jacket in hand, about to leave for a job interview unrelated to driving. A knock froze him in place. He opened the door, and there stood Charles Whitmore. No security. No entourage. Just Charles, holding a worn photograph. Marcus didn't speak. Charles held out the image of Elijah Cole beside his father. "That's your dad," he said softly. "He saved mine. I never knew." Marcus didn't move. Charles continued, "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. And I disgraced his name, and yours. Marcus's silence was ice. I don't want anything from you, he said. Then let me offer something back, Charles replied. Not for pity, for truth. The weight of legacy hung heavy between them. One step forward. One door cracked open. They sat across from each other at Marcus' kitchen table, two men divided by decades, wealth, and injustice. Charles looked down. My father told me once, never forget who helped you rise. I did. And now I see where that pride led me. Marcus remained composed. You don't get to rewrite history because you feel guilty. Charles nodded slowly. I know, but I want to make it right. Marcus leaned in. You can't erase what you said. You can't undo what it cost me. But maybe you can learn what it meant. Charles's eyes glistened, but he held back tears. You've carried more than I ever have, he admitted. I see that now. Marcus stood and walked to the window. It's not about what you see. It's about whether you'll remember it tomorrow. News broke the next day. Charles Whitmore held a press conference, not from his skyscraper podium, but on the steps of the very courthouse Marcus once stood. I was wrong, he said, voice stripped of bravado. I disrespected a man whose family built the ground I now walk on. I profited from a legacy that wasn't mine alone. The crowd murmured. This isn't damage control, it's debt recognition. Behind him, a new foundation banner hung. The Elijah Cole Fund for Dignity and Labor. Journalists pushed forward. Will Marcus Cole benefit financially from this? Charles replied, That's his decision. This isn't for me to repair, it's for me to acknowledge. For the first time, the man who owned everything finally gave something real. Back home, Marcus sat with Layla on the couch, the press conference still playing faintly on the TV. She looked up at him. You changed him, she said. Marcus shook his head. No, he changed because he had to look at who he was. Layla smiled. And who you are? Marcus looked down at the drawing she once gave him, still tucked in his wallet. He handed it back to her. You keep it, I've already lived it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights flickered on as the city settled into night. Ow. Marcus rose, picked up his coat, and turned to Layla. Let's go get dinner. I want you to see what quiet strength tastes like when it wins. She laughed. For once, it wasn't bittersweet. It was full. The invitation came unexpectedly. A private dinner event, exclusive, black tie, hosted by Charles Whitmore. The note simply read, for dignity, not apology. Marcus stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. Layla nudged him. You should go. He sighed. It's not my world. She smiled. Then make it yours, Dad. That evening, Marcus arrived in a rented tuxedo, shoulders squared. The ballroom was gold-trimmed, polished, intimidating. Yet when he entered, silence fell. Not out of mockery, but respect. Charles stood at the far end, watching him with something close to reverence. The past, present, and injustice all walked in with Marcus. But so did pride. He didn't need this world's approval. But, tonight, it would acknowledge him. Dinner moved in polite murmurs, silverware clinking under orchestral background music. At the end of the meal, Charles tapped his glass. Before I speak, he said, I want someone else to be heard. Gasps and whispers followed as he motioned to Marcus. The microphone was passed down like a relic. Marcus stood slowly, uncertain, but calm. I never asked to be here, he said. I didn't fight for headlines. I fought for my right to exist with dignity. He scanned the room. I am not a symbol. I'm a man, a father, a worker, a son of someone who gave everything and never asked for a thank you. His voice didn't tremble. But, tonight, I'll take it, for him. The room stood silent. A single clap echoed, then another. And then, all of it. After the event, Charles approached Marcus as the last of the guests drifted out. You didn't have to speak, he said quietly. Marcus shrugged. You didn't have to listen. Charles nodded. I've built towers, Marcus, but I never built what you have. Not with my name, not with my blood. A long pause followed. There's more I need to say, but it's not mine to offer yet. You let me know when you're ready. Marcus studied him. Don't look for forgiveness, Charles. Look for change. It'll last longer. Charles extended his hand, not as a billionaire, but as a man. Marcus hesitated, then shook it. Firm, not warm. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was recognition. A bridge had formed, not finished, but no longer burned. The next morning, Marcus and Layla walked through the neighborhood together. News had already spread about his speech. Murals were going up, one with his father's image, another with his. Strangers nodded as they passed. But Marcus didn't bask in it. Feels strange, he said. Layla grinned. Feels earned. They stopped at the corner where he'd once picked up Charles. The cab no longer waited there. Instead, a new plaque had been installed. This corner belongs to the ones who never gave up the wheel. Marcus read it quietly. His name was carved into the bottom. He smiled, not for the attention, but for the generations that would one day ask who he was. And get the truth. Later that day, Marcus returned to the cab depot, not to beg for work, but to meet with management. We'd like to bring you back, the supervisor said nervously. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I don't want a job. I want a voice. They hesitated. Supervisor role. Oversight on driver treatment. Full authority. Marcus took a breath. Then, I accept. Not for me. For every man who gets ignored behind a wheel. As he walked out, keys in hand, not to a cab, but an office, he saw a younger driver prepping for shift. The young man looked up. You're the guy, right? The one who stood up? Marcus smiled. Nah, he said. I'm just the guy who didn't sit down. And with that, he walked forward into something more than redemption, into purpose. A month later, Charles visited a local school, where the new Elijah Cole Scholarship was being awarded. He stood silently at the back of the auditorium, watching young students, many from working-class families, step up and accept their futures. He didn't speak on stage. He wasn't invited to. He wasn't needed there. The names being honored didn't belong to him. And that was the point. As one student held up their certificate, Charles' eyes welled. Not out of pride, but out of awareness. Redemption wasn't applause. It was silence and service. When he walked out, no one stopped him. No one recognized him. And it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Marcus visited his father's old neighborhood, the one Elijah used to drive through every day. Time hadn't been kind to the buildings, but children still played in the streets, laughter bouncing off brick walls. Marcus met an older man sitting outside a barber shop, who recognized him instantly. You're Eli's boy, the man smiled. He once fixed my tire in the rain, without asking for a cent. Marcus smiled. Sounds like him. The man leaned closer. Your father never raised his voice, but when he stood still, the whole world listened. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of legacy not measured in dollars, but in dignity. And now, it was his turn to keep standing. That evening, Marcus spoke at a local town hall, surrounded by cab drivers, warehouse workers, janitors and clerks, faces worn by labor but bright with fire. This isn't just my story, he said, pacing the room slowly. It's ours, and it's far from over. Murmurs of agreement rose. Respect doesn't come from the seat you're in. It comes from how you hold yourself when someone tries to lower it. The applause wasn't loud. It was steady. Earned. As he stepped down from the podium, one young woman rose and said, My father saw what you did, and now he walks taller. That was the moment Marcus realized. Change isn't declared. It's witnessed. Far from the city, Charles sat on the porch of a quiet retreat house. No cell service, no assistance, just wind through trees and the ticking of an old analog clock. He flipped through a notebook filled with handwritten letters, ones he never sent. To Marcus, to his father, to himself. He'd written them not to be forgiven, but to understand who he had become, and who he still had the chance to be. He looked out over the hills, exhaled, and whispered, "You didn't lose anything, Marcus. I did." For the first time, Charles wasn't trying to prove his power. He was learning to release it. At home, Marcus helped Layla pin her latest art piece to the living room wall, a hand-painted collage of her mother, Elijah, and Marcus himself. 3 generations standing tall, brushstrokes alive with legacy. "You like it?" she asked. Marcus blinked back tears. "It's perfect." The piece wasn't just memory, it was testament. Outside the window, the city hummed quietly. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Marcus turned to Layla. "You ready?" She grabbed her backpack. "Always." They stepped out together, locking the door behind them, not running from the past, but walking with it. And this time, they weren't alone. The road was theirs. No map, just direction. A month later, an unmarked black car pulled up to a familiar curb downtown. The passenger door opened, and Charles stepped in. The driver didn't look back. "Meter's running," Marcus said coolly. Charles smiled faintly, pulling the door shut. No one spoke. The city moved outside, horns, crowds, flashing lights. Inside, silence reigned. Marcus drove with calm precision, as he had 1,000 times before. But today, it wasn't about the fare. It was about something simpler: presence. Respect. At the next red light, Charles finally spoke. "You know, I used to think I owned the road." Marcus replied without looking, "You never did. You just took up space on it." Charles exhaled, nodded. No defense. Just truth. And the road kept moving. They arrived at the destination, a modest community center Marcus had helped rebuild using donations from the Elijah Cole Fund. Charles reached for his wallet, pulling out cash. Marcus turned, locking eyes in the mirror. "You can leave it on the seat," he said. Charles placed the folded bills down gently. "Thank you," he said, voice lower than usual. Marcus gave the faintest nod. "It's not about the money. It never was." Charles stepped out. No entourage. No cameras. Just a man walking into a building that stood because of another man's legacy. Marcus didn't wait for the door to close. He shifted into drive and moved forward. No drama. Just dignity. Inside the community center, kids played, elders gathered, and local artists displayed their work. A mural along the entrance wall showed Elijah Cole with a smile, a steering wheel in hand, and words that read, "Steered by strength, driven by truth." Charles walked the hall quietly, unnoticed by most. But he stopped at the mural and stared for a long while. He traced the painted line of Elijah's jaw, remembering the photo he once ignored. Then a young boy tugged his coat. "You lost, mister." Charles looked down, smiled gently. "No, kid, I'm exactly where I need to be." The boy ran off laughing, and Charles stood still, no longer trying to be seen. Just trying to see. Meanwhile, Marcus drove through the city with Layla in the passenger seat, a rare moment where work and family met. She looked out the window. "It's weird seeing your name on stuff," she said. Marcus smiled. "It's not mine, it's his. I'm just keeping the lights on." She turned to him. "You think Grandpa would be proud?" Marcus thought for a moment. "I think he'd be proud you asked." The cab cruised past billboards, murals, and street corners that once felt small but now pulsed with purpose. Marcus wasn't chasing justice anymore. He was living in its echo. And it was quiet. And it was enough. That night, the taxi pulled to a stop beneath a flickering street lamp, the same one from the beginning. Marcus shut off the engine. He and Layla sat in silence, watching the rain begin to fall again, soft and slow. He reached up and unclipped the drawing she'd made, the one with the crown. He folded it gently, placed it in his coat, and said, "Time to retire that one." She smiled. "So what now?" Marcus looked out at the road. "We drive forward, different route. same heart. And with that, they stepped out of the cab, walking into the night, not as victims of a moment, but as stewards of a legacy. One quiet, powerful step at a time.